Do you believe that angels really protect us? What if I told you that a simple prank saved a child's life? Thanks to divine intervention. It may sound like something out of a movie or a legend, but what you're about to hear is a true story, and it could completely change the way you see the invisible signs that surround you every day. Have you ever felt like something was protecting you? Without explanation, maybe this has happened to you, and you didn't even realize it. There are times when everything seems to be going according to plan in life, until in the blink of an eye, something completely unexpected happens, and then you get that strange feeling, as if an invisible force had acted behind the scenes to keep you away from danger. Was it just luck, or was it the silent touch of a guardian angel? Today, you will learn about the case of a child who, in the middle of a normal afternoon of play, was called to change places seconds before a tragedy happened. Such a simple, subtle change, but it made all the difference between life and death. As you listen to this story, think, what if it happened to you? This story begins like any other. A peaceful family, a child playing in the backyard, a clear sky, and no signs that anything was about to happen. But there is an invisible presence acting behind the scenes of this story, and the ending may seem impossible, but it happened. What you are about to discover now may surprise you. Stay until the end, because the last detail of this story is the most unbelievable. Many people talk about angels, divine signs, and coincidences that save lives. But when these signs appear before our eyes, especially at the most critical moments, it is impossible not to wonder, was it just a coincidence or a sign? And what is more, are we attentive enough to recognize these subtle touches of spirituality? Have we already been protected without even realizing it? If you've ever felt like someone invisible was helping you, you need to see this. This story isn't just heartwarming, it reveals something profound about the spiritual world, about how angels can act in discreet but extremely powerful ways. Let me know if you've ever felt something like this. You're not alone. Over the next few minutes, you will be immersed in a story that has no logical explanation, a narrative that moves, surprises, and inspires. And as the details emerge, you will realize there is something here that no one else notices. But when you understand, everything changes. Stay with me until the end, because this is not just another touching story. It is a call to open your spiritual eyes and pay attention to the small miracles of everyday life. After all, sometimes what seems like a simple change of direction can be the touch of an angel in action. And that's exactly what happened that afternoon, an ordinary afternoon, until the invisible decided to intervene, and it was so subtle, so silent, that only later, looking back, did the parents understand what had really happened. The innocent game that took the child away from there was not just a coincidence, it was a change, of course. Almost imperceptible, guided by something that cannot be seen with the eyes, but that can be felt in the heart. A protective force, a silent care, as if someone were there, present, even if invisible. As you listen to this story, something inside you may be stirring, a shiver, a memory, a feeling that is hard to explain. If at any point in your life you have felt something similar, that inner voice, that little push at the right time, that inexplicable presence that kept you away from danger, tell me in the comments. Share your experience, even if it seems simple. Maybe someone, somewhere, needs to read exactly what you have to say. Each comment you leave here carries an energy, and that's what keeps this space alive. This channel exists because there are people like you feeling, awakening, seeking to understand the signs that the spiritual world sends us. If this spoke to you, if this story touched you in some way, show that you're here with me. Like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's with your presence here that this message finds more hearts. When you interact, when you like, leave a comment, activate the bell. It's not just a number that grows. It's confirmation that this message needs to go further, that people are waking up, that there's a movement happening, a movement of faith, of sensitivity, of connection with what goes beyond logic, and you're part of it. So write below, in your own way, what this video awakened in you, because maybe you can't even imagine how much your story can touch someone today. And now, take a deep breath, because what comes next is the moment when everything changes. The story you are hearing now is real, and it didn't happen decades ago, nor in a distant place. It happened to ordinary people, in an ordinary setting. But with one detail that changed everything. It's another one of those situations that makes us question whether we are truly alone in this world, or if there is something or someone watching over us. Even in moments when we don't even suspect the danger, a mother, a father, a child, a simple house, a peaceful evening, nothing seemed out of the ordinary that day. The child was playing in the yard, as he always did. He ran from one side to the other, jumped, laughed. It was one of those moments when life seems in perfect harmony. But it is precisely in these kinds of moments that, often, the invisible manifests itself most clearly when no one is expecting it. What is striking about this story is not only what happened, but how it happened, because there was no screaming, there was no noise, there was no fuss, just a movement, almost imperceptible, that made the child change places seconds before an accident happened right where he was. And when the parents realized what had just been avoided, the first question that came to mind was, how was this possible? The mother reported that, at that moment, she felt something different in the air, as if time had slowed down. She looked outside and saw her daughter smiling, but not where she should have been. And then everything happened very quickly. A loose structure, which no one had noticed before, fell exactly where the girl played every day. If she had stayed there for 3 or 4 more seconds, the ending would have been different. But the most impressive thing came later. When the child was asked why he had left that place, the answer was direct, innocent, and disconcerting. The guy called me. He was dressed in white and said it was dangerous there. The child pointed to the place where no one could see anyone. But, for her, there was someone there. A man in white, with a calm and firm voice, who simply called her to play in another corner of the yard. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because these stories are not isolated. They are repeated around the world, with people of different ages, cultures, beliefs. They are silent calls, subtle touches, interferences that do not follow the rules of logic, but that carry a profound impact. It is in these moments that spirituality manifests itself most clearly, not as something distant or abstract, but as a present force that acts behind the scenes in our lives, a force that protects, directs, and corrects our course without us even realizing it. And the most beautiful thing about all this is that, most of the time, these interventions happen out of love, an invisible, silent, but absolutely real love. Many people who have been through similar situations describe the same sensation, an unexpected chill, a sudden change of heart, a delay that seemed bad but later saved their life. And when you start hearing these stories, one after the other, it's impossible to keep calling it all a coincidence. There's a pattern. There's a hidden truth behind many of these experiences. It's as if we're being guided by signs that call for attention, intuition, presence, signs that don't appear on neon signs, but that manifest themselves through small movements, unlikely encounters, impulsive decisions that later reveal a greater purpose. When you look with an open mind, you realize that nothing is as random as it seems. And perhaps the most important question here is, how many times have these signs passed us by, and we simply ignored them? How many times have we felt that discomfort in our chest, that sudden urge to leave a place, that insistent thought saying, don't go that way, and yet we still go on? How many tragedies have been silently avoided, without us knowing? This is the central point of this story. A common joke, one ordinary day, and a presence that, unseen, acted at the right time. And it's not about fear, but about perception, about sensitivity, about understanding that we are part of a greater journey and that there are forces working in our favor. Even when we don't understand why, when we open ourselves to this possibility, we begin to see the world through different eyes, and we begin to realize that perhaps that intuition, that change of plans, that inconvenient delay were exactly what saved us, and that changes everything. It changes the way we deal with life, the decisions we make, the way we interpret what happens around us. This story is not about theatrical miracles. It is about the subtle, about the detail, about the intervention that does not need to shout to be heard. It is about the light, almost imperceptible touch that pushes us in the right direction. It is about trust. It is about surrender. And, most importantly, it is about believing that, even in the moments when we think we are alone, we never are. What does this bring up in you? Tell me in the comments. If you've watched this far, comment, I feel the presence. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the question that arises after hearing a story like this is inevitable. Who are these beings that act for us, behind the scenes of visible reality? Who are these silent messengers that appear in moments when everything could fall apart, but doesn't? The answer, for many spiritual and religious traditions around the world, lies in the guardian angels. The idea of an angel walking alongside us from birth is not new. It has been around for centuries, cultures, and beliefs. In Christianity, guardian angels are considered to be direct messengers of God, individually assigned to each person, with the mission of protecting, guiding, and interceding for us. In the Jewish tradition, they appear as celestial agents responsible for carrying out divine orders, including the protection of the righteous. In Islam, there are also angels assigned to accompany human beings throughout their lives, recording their actions and protecting them from invisible evils. But what is most fascinating is that, even outside of organized religions, this perception persists. In many indigenous cultures, in Eastern spiritual lines, in popular beliefs passed down from generation to generation, there is always the figure of the invisible guardian, the protective spirit, the presence that manifests itself when danger is near. And when you observe this convergence in so many places, with so many different people, it is difficult to ignore. There seems to be a hidden truth that transcends time. We do not walk alone. Of course, this presence does not always manifest itself clearly. Often, it acts silently, a delay that saves us from an accident, a strong feeling that makes us change direction, an inner voice that warns us before we make a bad decision. Or, as in the case of that child, a simple game that takes him away from the exact place where the tragedy would happen. All of this may seem too subtle to those who look with the eyes of logic. But those who look with the heart understand. This understanding requires a change of mindset, because we are not talking about something that can be proven with equations or measured with instruments. We are talking about perception, about connecting with a deeper level of existence, about accepting that there are dimensions of reality that science has not yet reached, but that the soul recognizes. And perhaps this is the true challenge of our spiritual journey, learning to trust in the invisible, even when everything around us demands concrete explanations. What many people don't realize is that these angels don't just act in extreme moments, they also whisper in our moments of doubt. They protect us from decisions that could divert us from our mission, and they even keep people and situations away that, no matter how seductive they may seem, carry consequences that we are not prepared to face. They are present in unexpected turns, in encounters that change everything, in intuitions that we cannot explain. They are like a constant but discreet presence. They do not force, they do not control, they only guide. And if you've ever been through something like this, even if you didn't recognize it at the time, you probably felt it. That peace that comes in the midst of chaos. That I don't know why, but I took a different path. That little push that made you say yes or no at exactly the right time. It's not a coincidence. It's not chance, it's intervention. And when we start to recognize this, something inside us changes. We start to see meaning where there was previously confusion. We start to trust the journey, even without seeing the whole map. Guardian angels are not here to stop us from facing challenges, but to ensure that we do not face them alone. They are like invisible allies, ready to act when the risk is greater than we can perceive. And the more aware we are of their presence, the more open we will be to receiving these nudges, these messages, these course corrections that keep us on the path of truth, protection, and transformation. They do not manifest themselves out of vanity. They do not appear to impress. They are at the service of something greater, something that is far beyond the ego and fleeting desires. They help us remember who we are, what we came here to do, and what we need to avoid so as not to stray from the purpose that our soul carries. The journey with them is silent but profound. And when we acknowledge their presence, we not only feel more protected, we feel accompanied, we feel guided, and, most importantly, we feel loved, because only love would be capable of giving so much care without expecting anything in return. Comment here. That makes sense to me, because sometimes the manifestation of the invisible happens just when everything seems to be in perfect order, no obvious sign, no omen, just the everyday simple, routine, apparently harmless. And that is where the great revelation lies. Danger does not always announce itself with fanfare. Often, it hides in the ordinary, and it is precisely in this silent space that the higher powers act most wisely. It was an ordinary day, nothing out of the ordinary. A clear sky, a light breeze, that gentle warmth that soothes the late afternoon. In the home of a family like any other, everything followed the usual rhythm. The mother in the kitchen, preparing something for dinner. The father finishing a simple repair in the side hallway. The child, with the energy of someone who has the whole world inside her, ran around the yard, laughing alone, inventing her own games. There was no rush, there was no worry. It was just another day. But that's the beauty and the mystery of life. It doesn't tell you when everything is going to change. And that day, something changed. It's just that no one noticed it at the time. The little girl played near the back fence. There was a space there where she loved to hide, invent huts, pretend she was exploring enchanted forests. It was her private refuge, where her imagination created worlds that only she could see. Her mother watched from afar, smiling every now and then, proud to see her growing up so freely. No strange noises, no sense of alert, but there was something brewing behind the scenes of that scene. What no one knew yet was that there was an old, forgotten metal structure on the verge of collapse. A makeshift gate, leaning against the wall, already rusted by time. A stronger wind, a slight vibration in the ground, and that heavy piece of iron could fall exactly where the child was. But it didn't fall. At least, not while she was there, because, in an instant so fast it could barely be measured, she stopped playing. She stopped, out of nowhere. She looked ahead, as if someone had called her name. Then she turned her body, walked calmly to the other side of the yard, and bent down to pick up a pebble from the ground. No rushing, no fright. It was a smooth, natural movement, but absolutely decisive. 3 seconds later, the gate fell. A loud crash, the sound of metal hitting the ground, and dust rising into the air. The mother ran to the window, her heart freezing, and she saw it. She saw the iron on the ground. She saw her daughter looking at it, still holding the stone in her hand. And only then did she realize what it meant. Time stopped for a second, because if she had taken just one more step, if she had stayed in that corner for just one more moment, the father arrived next, startled by the noise. The two looked at each other, speechless. Until the girl, with the calm of someone who still lives between two worlds, said quietly, The man told me to get out of there. He said it wasn't safe. The mother bent down, trying to understand. What man, daughter? And she answered, the man who came with the light. He looked like me, but he was big, all in white. He smiled and called me. Silence. That kind of silence that carries more than the absence of sound. It carries understanding. It carries something sacred, because there was no way to doubt it. It wasn't an invention, it wasn't a daydream, it was true. A truth that escaped logic, but that made perfect sense to those who were there. A presence had manifested itself. A decision had been made, not out of fear, but out of spiritual impulse. A change of direction that cannot be explained in words, but that defines destiny's dot. It is in this type of scenario the most common, the most everyday, that the signs appear most clearly, not with flashing lights or voices echoing in the sky, but with subtlety, with lightness, with that whisper that only sensitive souls can hear. And that is what happened there. An intervention, hidden within a joke, a salvation, disguised as chance. And why are stories like these so powerful? Because they remind us of something essential. Spirituality does not live only in temples, in ceremonies, or in the words of sacred books. It inhabits the backyard, the hallway, the ordinary moment. It is present while we cook, while we sweep the house, while we gaze at the sky without thinking about anything. It is in this simple space that the divine finds a home. And that is why we need to be alert, because protection can arrive when we least expect it. And sometimes it disguises itself as a stone on the ground. This episode touched so many people, not only because of what was avoided, but because of the way it happened, because it changes our perception of reality, because it forces us to consider that perhaps there are eyes watching us that do not belong to this world, and that perhaps there is enough love in those eyes to protect us even when we are distracted. It changes the way we look at life, because the ordinary ceases to be banal and becomes sacred. What was the strongest signal you ever received? Comment below. I felt that too. As peaceful and safe as the day seemed, there was something in that backyard that no one had noticed. Something that was there the whole time, silent, still, until the exact moment he prepared to act. It is at this point in the story that the atmosphere changes. Because the danger, in this case, did not announce itself with screams, had no color, smell, or threatening presence. It was almost invisible, and yet, real enough to put a life at risk. The metal structure leaning against the back wall seemed harmless. It had been left there for weeks, maybe even months, without anyone caring about it. It was just an old, rusty, forgotten gate. But time and physics conspire silently. The iron, corroded by the rain and constant sun, began to lose stability. The gentle wind that blew in the late afternoon found a gap, an angle, a precise inclination. And so, what was just a piece of metal leaning against it became a trap, ready to collapse. The most disturbing thing is that no one noticed. Not the mother, who knew every corner of the yard, not the father, who passed through that gate almost every day without realizing the imminent risk. That's what's scary, how danger can be so close, so visible, and yet completely ignored. Because when we're immersed in the routine, in the repetition of the days, our eyes get used to it. What was once a warning sign becomes part of the scenery. And the hidden truth in all of this is that most of the most serious risks in our lives don't come screaming out, they hide in what we call normal. The child, so absorbed in her play, spun around the gate. She made it part of a fantasy, a castle, perhaps, a secret hiding place. One of her feet lightly touched the iron as she moved. Each touch, each small impact, contributed to the weakening of that precarious balance. And while the adults went about their daily routine, without imagining what was about to happen, the danger gained strength. It gained momentum. It gained weight. And it was at that exact moment, that fragment of time between the ordinary and the inevitable, that something intervened. Something that could not be measured, seen, or controlled. Because there was no time for warnings. There was no time to rush. The time that there was millimeter-sized. A call, an impulse, a breath of intuition, an off-script movement, a sudden change of focus. Something that many would call chance, but which, when observed closely, bears all the signs of a greater interference. The girl suddenly stopped. She took 2 steps to the side, crouching down as if looking for something on the ground. And it was exactly in that space that time changed. The gate came loose. The metal fell with a sharp, precise, loud bang. A fraction of a second before, the fragile body of that child had been there. But now it was gone. It was just a few meters away, intact, innocent, protected. When the mother heard the noise and ran to the door, she saw what could have happened, and at that moment, her blood ran cold. Her mind tried to understand, to reconstruct the previous seconds. It was impossible. Nothing made sense, until she heard her daughter say, once again, that the man with the light had called her, and that he had not only made her leave, but had pointed exactly where she should go. A safe place, a point outside the impact zone. Details that, even for a trained adult, would be difficult to assess so quickly. But that, for a child, came clearly. as if someone had drawn the path. And the most impressive thing is this: the precision, the accuracy, the mathematically perfect timing between her departure and the moment of collapse. This kind of synchronization cannot be explained by statistics or calculations. It speaks directly to another dimension of reality, one where decisions are not based solely on logic, but on something that goes beyond purpose, protection, mission. It is as if life were constantly balancing between the visible and the invisible, between chance and alignment, between chaos and care. And in this case, care won out. What could have been a day of mourning became a day of testimony, a living reminder that we do not always realize the dangers that surround us, but even so, we are protected. This family's story could have taken a completely different path, and if this hadn't happened to them, many people might not even believe it. But when something like this happens right before our eyes, when the line between tragedy and miracle is so thin that it cuts our souls, there's no way to go on living the same way. And so I ask you, how many invisible dangers have you encountered without even knowing it? How many times have you been forced to change course, make a different decision, delay your journey by a few minutes, and only later have you realized that you escaped something you never imagined? The spiritual journey teaches us to see beyond what is obvious, to hear what is not said, to feel what cannot be touched. This story is more than a tale of protection. It is a revelation about how much we still don't know about the reality that surrounds us. A reality where time, intuition, and the invisible are silently intertwined, shaping our destiny without us realizing it. And when we can see this, even the simplest moment of our day becomes valuable, because everything can change in the blink of an eye. And what saves us, many times, is that which logic cannot explain, but which the soul recognizes. If you're watching this far, comment, I'll continue. The moment that changed everything didn't come with a bang. It came with an almost imperceptible subtlety, as if the universe itself took a deep breath for a second. It was then that the silent turning point in history took place. That innocent, common, almost banal joke suddenly became the scene of an inexplicable and essential movement. The girl, still wrapped up in her world of imagination, laughed to herself as she ran among the plants and objects in the yard. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She spoke softly, as if she were talking to someone invisible. She pointed to the sky, bounced small branches on the ground, and described, in invented words, what she saw inside her fantasy. A beautiful, pure scene that every father and mother knows. But there was something different that afternoon. A presence, a subtle energy that seemed to have whispered something that no one else heard. She stopped suddenly, and those observing from the outside, without knowing everything, might think it was just a change of heart. Maybe she got tired of the game. Maybe she saw a butterfly and decided to follow another path. But for those who are sensitive, it is clear. There was a call, a kind of sudden redirection, as if an invisible force had touched her shoulder affectionately and said, "This is not the way." She looked to the side, as if someone were standing beside her, her eyes fixed on an empty spot, but they expressed listening, as if she were listening to a silent instruction. And then, naturally, she turned her body and walked in another direction. 2 steps, 3, and stopped in front of a smooth stone on the ground. She crouched down, picked up the stone, and began to observe it as if it were a rare treasure. What happened next you already know. The crash, the metal gate, falling violently on the exact spot where she had been seconds before. But what perhaps not everyone understands is what motivated that change. Was it a wind, a sound, an imaginary friend, or something else? Children have this connection with the invisible that, over time, adults end up losing. They do not question the origin of things. They feel, trust, follow. And perhaps this is exactly what allows subtle interventions to happen so fluidly in childhood. The absence of resistance, the purity of inner listening, the openness to that which cannot be seen, but which is known. And if you look closely, there are many details in this episode that reveal the depth of this intervention. The exact timing, the calmness of the child as he walked away, the lack of fear, the sudden focus on something completely different. These are clear signs that there was an influence beyond the ordinary. Something that acted not only to prevent a tragedy, but to preserve the lightness of that moment. There was no trauma. There was no crying. There was just a change of course, and a lesson for those who were watching. This kind of experience makes us think about how we conduct our own journey. How many times are we about to make a decision that seems logical and safe, but a feeling inside us says, turn left? How many times does something in our heart, not in our mind, tell us to back off, wait, or simply do something different than planned? And how many times do we ignore this, thinking it's just a distraction, a silly idea, an unfounded idea? What happened to this child reminds us that listening to this call can be the difference between staying and falling, between moving forward in peace or facing the weight of something that could have been avoided. Of course, not every warning comes with clarity. Sometimes, it's just an inconvenience. Other times, it's a memory that comes out of nowhere. But what these signs have in common is that they almost always come with a strange peace, as if, even without understanding, we know that it's the right thing to do, and the most beautiful thing about all this is that this intervention took place through a language that the child understood. Play. She was not pulled by the arm. She did not hear a scream. She did not feel afraid. She was invited, within the logic of her playful world, to leave the dangerous place and move to a safe space. This shows how much these presences that protect us act wisely. They do not force. They do not distance us from who we are. They enter our reality gently, with empathy. And there, in our own emotional language, they lead the change. This story reminds us that true spirituality is not found in rigid rituals or complicated concepts. It is in listening. It is in sensitivity. It is in the lightness of those who still know how to play, of those who still allow themselves to be guided by something that cannot be seen, but that can be felt clearly. And maybe, just maybe, the secret lies there, to play again, to trust again, to allow something greater to guide us, without resistance, without fear, without the need to control everything all the time. If this story touched your soul, if at some point you too have changed your path without knowing exactly why, and only later realized how important it was, then you know what I'm talking about. You know that there is something beyond. Something that acts, that cares, that guides, and you also know that, even in the simplest things, there is a secret code of protection, of love, of presence. Since you've come this far, prove it to me. Comment, I feel the presence. And perhaps it is precisely this openness that allows us to receive more, because the more attentive we are to the subtle signs, the clearer they become. It is as if the invisible begins to trust our listening, and, little by little, that feeling of protection, of guidance, stops seeming like a coincidence, and starts to feel like a silent certainty. Life takes on a different texture. Decisions begin to come more clearly. Fear diminishes. Presence increases. And if you've come this far, it's because this subject resonated somewhere within you. And so, if it makes sense, take a look at the material I left below. Reading Your Birth Angel. It is something that I prepared with care, especially for those who want to delve deeper into this connection with the angelic kingdom in a practical, direct, and at the same time deeply transformative way. This content complements what we talked about here and can save you a lot of time in practice. It shows you how to access your angel's guidance in a personalized way, based on your own energy and moment in life. And it helps you navigate the transformations that are coming, with more awareness and less resistance. It's here in the description, but I might take it down in the next few days. So, if it's useful to you, take advantage of it while it's still available, because some messages arrive when we need them most, and maybe this is one of them. When we talk about divine intervention, many people imagine lights in the sky, powerful voices, a striking presence that paralyzes everything around. But the hidden truth is that, most of the time, miracles happen in silence. They go almost unnoticed, as if they were just luck or coincidence. Except that they are not. The impact is real, even when it is not noisy. And that is exactly what happened there, in that backyard. A few seconds after the girl walked away, the noise tore through the air. A dry, unexpected crash, loud enough to make anyone freeze. The gate, the one that seemed harmless, leaning against it for months, forgotten, simply collapsed under its full weight. It didn't slide, it didn't fall lightly, it collapsed, and it fell exactly where, a moment before, that child had been sitting, with her little hands dirty with dirt, laughing at her own fantasy. In that second, time seemed to split in two. Before, it was just another day. Then it was the day when everything could have ended, but it didn't. Metal twisted the floor. The noise echoed off the walls. The neighbors heard it. The mother ran with her heart in her throat, thinking it was too late. But it wasn't. And when she saw her daughter standing, unharmed, looking at it all with a mixture of curiosity and peace, she understood. Not with her mind, but with her soul. If she were there, she wouldn't be here anymore. This phrase has been hammering away in the parents' heads for days. And perhaps it still is, because when the heart almost breaks at the thought of a loss, and at the same time is pierced by a gratitude so strong that it almost burns, the memory does not forget, and it should not forget, because this type of event carries a powerful lesson. There are forces that protect us, even when we are not aware of it. The most curious thing is that, later that same day, the child repeated that the light man asked her to leave. She said it so naturally, as if it were obvious, as if it were routine, as if it were no big deal for someone to show up, smile, and show her another way. And that's when we understand. For her, that wasn't a miracle. It was just love. It was care. It was part of reality, a reality that adults, in such a hurry and burden, sometimes fail to notice. This story is one of those that we tell quietly, almost like a secret, because, for many, it is still hard to believe that the invisible can be so precise, that the spiritual can touch the physical with such precision. But it happens, and when it happens, it leaves its mark. It changes the mindset of those who lived it, those who saw it, those who heard it later. It makes us rethink our decisions, review our priorities, understand the behind the scenes of life with different eyes. And most importantly, it reminds us that we are not alone. Even when everything seems normal, there are eyes on us. There is presence, there is alertness, there is guidance. And when we cultivate this listening, this sensitivity, this state of openness, the signs become clearer. Not because something outside of us changes, but because something inside of us awakens. It is a journey, a process of reconnecting with that which has always been there, but which the rush of the modern world has taught us to ignore. This episode of The Tragedy That Didn't Happen also reveals something essential about trust, because that girl didn't question things. She wasn't afraid to leave the place where she was. She simply responded to the call, lightly, like someone dancing with life. And this is something we can take from our own experience. How many times do we insist on staying where we shouldn't? How many times do we feel it's time to change direction, but our ego resists, our mind blocks us, and doubts hold us back? The truth is that life always whispers. Sometimes it shouts, but we don't always listen. And when we finally learn to recognize these calls, even if they come unexpectedly, like an intuition, a dream, a shiver, everything changes. We begin to walk with more presence, with more connection, and we realize that every movement, every choice, every little detail can have a much bigger reason than it seems. Now, tell me, what was the strongest signal you ever received? Comment below. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely when the initial impact wears off that the true revelations begin to emerge. In the heat of the moment, everything seems like chaos and relief, but it is in the days that follow, in the silence of reflection, in the interrupted conversations at night, in the memories that insist on returning, that the invisible begins to take shape. And that is exactly what happened to the parents of that child. After the shock, the questions came. The mother, her voice still trembling, tried to understand what had made her daughter leave. The girl's answer was as simple as it was disarming. The man from the light asked me to go into the shadows. She said this with shining eyes and the serene certainty of someone who does not doubt what she saw. But the father was the one who felt it the most. He did not see the angel. He did not hear the voice, but he felt it. At the time of the fall, he was inside the house, a few meters from the backyard, and he described something that, even with all the logic he always had, he could not explain. He said he had a sudden chill, a feeling so clear that something was wrong, that he dropped everything and ran to the back of the yard without even knowing why. He arrived just as the gate was already in the ground and his daughter was standing, inches from danger. And that's when he muttered something that stuck with him. It felt like a force was pulling her, like someone was there with her. This sentence was said softly, almost like a thought escaping from the mouth. But it carries an immense weight, because it reveals a shared experience, even if in different ways. The girl saw it, the father felt it, and both, in some way, were touched by the same presence. And this type of story, this type of synchronicity, appears in many stories. Real stories, profound stories, stories that do not fit into rational explanation, but that fit perfectly into the language of the soul. And this is what many people don't realize. The spiritual is not far from our reality. It permeates our routine. It acts behind the scenes, in the gaps between one decision and another, in the folds of time that seem common but carry hidden meanings. When we look from the outside, everything seems to have happened by chance. But those who have lived it know. They know that there is something greater, guiding, protecting, and shaping our paths even when everything around us seems random. This revelation changed something within that family. The father's mindset, which until then had been more skeptical, began to open up. He didn't become a blind believer, nor did he start talking about angels all the time. But he began to pay attention, to feel more, to question less, and most importantly, to trust more in the sensations that he had previously ignored. The transformation didn't come with thunder or mystical lights. It came with silence, with listening, with acceptance. It came with the understanding that some things don't need to be explained to be true. And that's where one of the great lessons of this journey lies. We won't always see the signs with our eyes. Sometimes, the sign is the shiver. Sometimes, it's the sudden pause. The impulse that takes us away from a place seconds before something happens. The discomfort for no reason. The desire to change direction. The feeling that there's something wrong even when everything seems right. And when we learn to respect these subtle clues, life begins to align itself more precisely. It's not about superstition. It's about perception. It's about recognizing that beyond logic, there is a field of wisdom that operates on a different frequency and that is available to anyone willing to listen. Those parents listened. One through intuition, the other through their daughter's vision. And that was enough to completely change the way they saw the world. From that moment on, everything took on a new layer of meaning. Simple days stopped being just routine. They became opportunities for connection. Because once you feel that kind of presence, you can't live the same way again. And now I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Share it below. And it was only when the child began to tell us what she felt, with that naturalness that only little ones have, that something even deeper emerged. Because until then, everything was feelings, intuition, and adult perception. But her speech was like turning on a flashlight in a dark room. Because when a child speaks truthfully, without a filter, we feel it. Her voice is more than just sound. It is a direct channel to something that we often forget to hear. As the years go by, the mother, still shaken by what had happened, asked almost casually, as if trying to find a balance, "Why did you run away from there?" And the answer was like a silent blow to the hearts of everyone nearby. "It was the young man in white who called me. He told me to get out of there and play in the shade." The girl said this with her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she were simply remembering something that made perfect sense to her, like someone remembering simple advice from someone they trust. The father and mother looked at each other. Neither knew what to say. This was not imagination. It was not a game. It was firm, it was clear, and it had a weight that could not be explained logically. The young man in white. This figure, this presence, appears in so many stories around the world that it would be naive to dismiss it as coincidence. In different cultures, different languages, different contexts, this same description comes back, again and again. Always someone dressed in white, sometimes with wings, sometimes with a light around them, sometimes just with a voice that brings peace. But the pattern is always the same, a presence that arrives at the right moment, at the exact point, and changes everything. And it is curious to think about how these manifestations reach us, not with a bang, but with subtlety, not with grandeur, but with precision. This young man in white could have stopped the tree from falling, or stopped the car from passing. But that is not what happened. What happened was a call, a touch. In the child's mind, a sudden inspiration, a desire to change places. This, yes, is the true miracle, the invisible wisdom of knowing how to act behind the scenes. Respecting free will, but offering a new possibility at the exact moment. This type of intervention invites us to rethink our relationship with the invisible world, because perhaps, many times, what we call intuition is exactly that, a subtle whisper from the spiritual trying to guide us. Maybe that feeling that something is strange is not just paranoia, but a message disguised as instinct. And perhaps, the invisible friends that many children say they have are not figments of imagination, but real companions, disguised in a way that the child's mind can understand. And here comes a hidden truth that we rarely stop to consider. Spirituality is not about big things. It is about details. It is about understanding what is happening between the lines. It is about listening more with the heart than with the ears. This child listened, and more than that, he trusted. And that is what makes all the difference. Because, many times, the signs come, but we doubt, rationalize, ignore. And this has everything to do with our mentality, with our degree of openness, with the way we choose to interpret the signs. The girl's words were met with emotion. Her mother cried silently. Her father rubbed his eyes, trying to contain something that even he couldn't explain. But the atmosphere in that place was never the same again. It was as if, from that day on, something had been unlocked. The feeling of constant protection, the heightened awareness, the understanding that, even in the simplest moments, there are forces that work for us even when we don't even know we're in danger. This story doesn't end there, but it already reveals how much we can be guided by something that goes beyond what is visible, and how trusting in this movement can be the difference between chaos and miracle. In the end, all that child did was listen, and perhaps that is all we need to learn to do again. If this touched your heart, right, I felt that too. Now, let's continue. Because what comes next may further transform the way you view this journey. When we look at this type of story, with an open heart, we begin to realize that it is not as isolated as it seems. It echoes, it reverberates in other stories, in other families, in other situations that, despite differing in details, carry the same essence, the invisible touch of a presence that protects, guides, and transforms. And the most curious thing is that, when we start talking to more sensitive people or simply more attentive, these stories begin to appear with an impressive frequency. There are mothers who say that their son saw a light before a scare. There are drivers who swerved out of the way on impulse and avoided an accident. There are elderly people who feel an invisible hand preventing them from falling. None of this seems to make sense in the light of pure reason. But within spiritual logic, everything fits together. And when we return to what happened to that child and to the figure she described as the young man in white, this takes on even more weight, because within many spiritual traditions, both ancient and contemporary, there is a very clear convergence on the action of beings of light, especially with the most vulnerable. Children, because of their purity, are especially sensitive to these manifestations, not only because they have cleaner hearts, but because they have not yet been contaminated by the excess of logic and skepticism that adults accumulate over time. That is why they see, that is why they feel, that is why they trust. In many cultures, guardian angels are seen as personal messengers from the spiritual plane for each incarnated soul. They do not appear frequently, and they usually do not manifest themselves directly, but in critical moments, when something needs to be avoided, When a life needs to be spared or a trauma needs to be alleviated, they act. Sometimes with a breath of intuition, sometimes with a symbolic image, sometimes, as in this case, with a clear, defined, and protective presence that guides a child to the right place at the right time. And it is precisely this subtlety that confirms their spiritual origin, because angels, contrary to what movies sometimes show, do not arrive to impress, they arrive to save. And they disappear soon after, leaving in the air only the certainty that something greater has just happened. The impact that this intervention had on the family's life was more profound than anyone could have imagined, not just because of gratitude, but because something opened up there. A new perception, a different confidence, a presence that, even though invisible, began to be felt more clearly. And that's what happens when we experience this kind of miracle. It's not just the situation that changes, it's our mindset. It's as if something reconfigured the way we walk through life, as if that part of us that was dormant, the one that knows, feels, senses, awakens again. And perhaps this is the most important point of all this: the transformation that happens afterwards. Because the real miracle is not just the fact that the child was saved, but what is transformed within those who witness this type of intervention. The hidden truth is that these events are invitations. Silent calls for us to look beyond the surface, for us to recognize that the journey we are on is more than it seems, that there are spiritual forces constantly moving behind the scenes, trying to align us with our greater purpose, and this is where everything connects. Because when we look at this event with the eyes of the Spirit, we understand that it was not a coincidence, nor a mere coincidence. It was a revelation, a reminder that we are not alone, that there is something or someone following our steps even when everything seems to silent. And if this touches you in some way, if you have already experienced something similar, or even if it is awakening in you a new way of seeing the world, perhaps this is your own calling too, a kind of confirmation that your sensitivity is not madness, it is a gift, it is a tool, it is a bridge to the invisible. These cases show us that spirituality is neither distant nor unattainable. It is present in everyday life, between the lines, in the small details that most people ignore. It reveals itself in the gentle movement of leaves, in the shiver that appears out of nowhere, in the inner voice that insists on showing us a different path. The secret is to cultivate a more refined listening, a more alert look, a more available soul. Because, in the end, perhaps the greatest sign is not the presence of an angel who saves, but the consciousness that awakens afterwards. The certainty that we are accompanied, the humility to accept invisible help, and the courage to continue listening, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. Show me that you are here with me. Right, I continue. And now, let me expand on that understanding with something that few people really see. For many people, this part of the story may seem the hardest to believe. A child so young seeing something that the adults around him didn't see. But what if I told you that, spiritually speaking, this is not only possible, but expected, that within many lines of wisdom, both ancient and modern, there is an understanding that children are, in fact, the purest and most open channels for capturing what happens beyond matter. This is not superstition. It is sensitivity. And when we start to look closely at these stories, like the one about the girl who said that the boy in white called her at the very moment of danger, everything starts to make more sense. There is a profound reason for this. Children have not yet been fully conditioned by the rational world. They are not afraid to imagine. They do not filter what they feel with so much judgment. They do not disbelieve their own intuition. And this is exactly why they are able to see, hear, or perceive presences that an adult, bogged down in the worries of everyday life, might not even notice. This is not a flaw. It is a gift that, over time, most lose due to lack of stimulation, or worse, due to repression. How many times does a child say that he saw something shining, or talks about an invisible friend, and is promptly corrected, disbelieved, or ignored? What could be the beginning of a spiritual connection turns into silence, and over time, this channel closes. But while it is open, it is powerful. That is why many spiritual manifestations, especially the more subtle and loving ones, choose children as their point of contact. Not because adults do not deserve it, but because children still have internal space to receive. They do not question harshly. They welcome, and in this welcoming, the spiritual finds a way to express itself. Now think about it. How many stories have you heard in which a child tells something that no one taught them, or describes a feeling that no adult around could explain? This is more common than it seems, and it's no coincidence. It's the presence of the invisible, manifesting itself through those who haven't yet been blocked by excess logic. And the most beautiful thing is that many of these children grow up remembering these moments. They don't forget, because what is experienced at the level of the soul doesn't go away. It just stays dormant until one day, for some reason, it awakens again. This hidden truth about children's sensitivity to the spiritual world also has important implications for us adults, because it invites us to reflect on how disconnected we are from what was once natural to us. Everyone, at some point in their childhood, has had premonitions, intense dreams, the feeling of being watched by something good. But as we grow up, we exchange these for cold certainties, for a mentality that only accepts what can be proven, and we lose something very valuable along the way: contact with the subtle, dialogue with the invisible, the ability to trust what we feel, even when we cannot explain it. So when a child says they saw an angel, or that someone from the light spoke to them, perhaps the best thing we can do is not doubt them but listen, because, deep down, they may be showing us something we forgot to see. And more than that, they may be reminding us that this connection still exists. It just needs to be reactivated. They need space. They need silence. They need courage. Courage to open your heart, to embrace the mystery, to admit that not everything that matters can be seen with the naked eye, and that, often, it is the invisible that transforms us the most. Because it is at this more subtle level that true miracles happen. Those that make no noise, do not ask for permission, and do not leave concrete evidence, but completely change the way we walk through life. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject because there is something that many people still don't understand about how these spiritual presences choose the exact moment to act. And this can completely change your view on signs, intuition, and destiny. If you're watching this far, comment, "I won't stop here." And when we begin to delve into this universe with an open heart, we realize that this type of experience, as extraordinary as it may seem, is far from isolated. There are countless reports, from different parts of the world, of moments in which something or someone intervened in a mysterious way, almost impossible to explain rationally, to prevent a tragedy. Different people, different cultures, but the same energy behind it. A force that appears when all seems lost. A presence that manifests itself when danger approaches. For example, there is the case of a woman who lost control of her car on a deserted road. The vehicle overturned and stopped at the edge of a cliff. She was trapped, her cell phone had no signal, and no one was around. Suddenly, a man appeared. Tall, serene, with deep eyes and a voice that conveyed peace. He managed to open the door, get her out, and take her to a safe place. When the firefighters arrived, she tried to point out where the man was, but he had simply disappeared. No footprints, no trail, no explanation. Or the 5-year-old boy who fell into a river while on a family outing. The current was strong, and there was no time to react. But at the last second, something pulled him to shore as if an invisible hand had shoved him forcefully out of the water. Afterwards, wide-eyed and still gasping for breath, all he could say was, "It was the bright girl. She caught me." These reports are not isolated cases. When you start looking closely, you discover a pattern, a type of intervention that defies logic, but resonates with the heart. These are experiences that were not provoked by prayer, nor by conscious invocation, but happened through connection, by alignment, by mission, and this reveals a much deeper hidden truth. Angels do not always wait to be called. Many times, they are simply where they need to be. They act by divine order. They manifest themselves, on purpose, not because they deserve it. And this, in itself, completely changes the mindset of those who think they need to be perfect to receive this type of help. In fact, what connects us most to this spiritual dimension is openness. It is the ability to feel, to not ignore the signs, to notice when something, even invisible, touches the invisible within us. And every time we hear stories like this, like the one about the child saved by a luminous presence, or the one about the man who disappeared after saving a life, we are reminded that there is a spiritual framework in everything we experience, an invisible mechanism that acts when we least expect it, but never by chance. And it's interesting how these events, even when they last for seconds, leave deep scars. Many people who have been through this say they've never been the same. Again, something changes in the way they see the world. It's as if a new layer of reality is revealed, a new lens, more sensitive, more intuitive, because after you've experienced something like this, there's no going back to normal. You realize that there's a world beyond what meets the eye, and that it's real, present, in motion. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a powerful detail in these cases that many people overlook, an element that appears frequently in these stories and that may be the key to understanding Masar. Protected at exactly the exact second when everything could have fallen apart. Comment. This message was for me. And in the face of all this, an inevitable question begins to echo, perhaps even silently. Within those who feel this message, have angels saved us before, and we simply not noticed? This doubt, while it brings mystery, also carries a hidden truth that many ignore. Not all protection is visible. Not all salvation comes with lights in the sky or audible voices. Sometimes, it is a sudden change of route, a delay that irritates but prevents something worse. A strong feeling, almost without apparent reason, that makes us avoid a path or postpone a decision. Other times, it is the disappearance of a key, a flat tire before a trip, a little pain that makes us postpone an appointment. And then we discover that there was an accident in that place, that that person was involved in a mess, that that moment was decisive and we escaped. Without understanding, without seeing. But we were saved. And this changes everything. we start to perceive things with a different mindset, because spiritual protection does not always come with a spectacle. It comes with a purpose, with divine intention. It acts in the invisible, between the lines of life. And that is why so many reports of angelic intervention are not about grand mystical moments, but about details, minutiae, silences that scream, coincidences that touch us deeply. And this invites us to reflect on something even greater. Are we paying attention to the signs? Are we sensitive enough to notice when something is guiding us? Because, often, what is missing is not presence, it is perception. Heaven acts, but if we are too distracted, too disconnected, too rushed, we don't see it, we don't feel it, we don't honor it, and then we go through life asking for signs, while the signs have already been sent for a long time, only ignored. This type of awakening does not require religion or complicated rituals. It begins with an internal decision to be more present, to pay more attention to details, to listen to intuition, to embrace that feeling that insists inside your chest, even when your mind wants to rationalize. Because this sensitivity opens portals. It does not create miracles, but it allows us to perceive them. And when perception awakens, life changes. From the inside out, many people report this. After borderline experiences, moments of fear, loss, or unexpected rediscoveries of faith. But you don't have to reach your limit to recognize that you are not alone. Just take a deep breath and look around you with more intention. Notice how certain things align. How certain people appear at exactly the right time. How certain pushes in life, even if uncomfortable, keep us away from what would harm us. All of this has a spiritual background, a greater plan, and the angels are part of it. They are not here to control our journey, but to support what we consciously choose. They respect our free will, but they do not stay away from our journey. And the more we connect with this truth, the more we become able to perceive their action. It is like tuning into a frequency. The signal is already in the air, but you only hear it if you are tuned in. And when you listen, everything takes on new meaning. Now, tell me, how many times have you felt that something protected you, but you couldn't explain it? How many times did something go wrong, and then you realized that, in fact, it was a deliverance? How many times has life taken you in a direction, and only later did it make sense? These moments are not empty. They have spiritual weight, and the more you embrace this, the more you open yourself to a silent but powerful transformation. Perhaps, without realizing it, you have already been saved. Perhaps, without knowing it, your angels have already acted. And perhaps, now, you are being called not to see with your eyes, but to feel with your soul. If you felt this energy, say, I receive. And perhaps now is the most important moment in this journey of awareness that we are all experiencing together here. The moment to stop and remember. Take a deep breath, and let situations come to mind that, at first glance, seemed common. But, looking at it more calmly, with a different mindset, hides something much bigger. Do you know those moments when everything could have gone wrong? When you were seconds away from a tragedy, or about to make a decision that would take you down a completely different path, and something stopped you. Sometimes it was just a silly delay. A cell phone left at home, a bus that came early, a phone call that changed the course of the conversation, a sudden discomfort that made you change your mind at the last second. Situations like these happen to everyone. The difference lies in how we interpret these pauses, these changes, these unexpected detours. Because when we start to see things more deeply, everything changes. Chance starts to lose ground. And instead of doubt, perception emerges. A connection with something bigger. And this is where reflection comes into play. Because if you stop and look at it sincerely, you will realize that your life is full of chapters like this. Small moments that passed too quickly for you to understand at the time, but that, looking back now, take on spiritual contours. Maybe it was that time when you decided to take another path and later learned that something serious had happened right where you would have been. Or that friendship that suddenly drifted apart, and then you realized that that cycle really needed to end. Or even that pain that made you stop, isolate yourself, reflect. And that's why you weren't where you shouldn't have been. It doesn't matter what the form was. What matters is the impact it had on your trajectory. Because when the invisible acts, it doesn't need to be understood immediately. It just needs to be recognized. And this recognition isn't about superstition, it's about expansion, about maturing your way of seeing the world, of reading the signs, of feeling what's behind appearances. And here comes something very special. Our spiritual memory. Yes, we all have one. Even without consciously remembering, our soul keeps records. And sometimes, all it takes is a silence, a smell, a song, a place, to activate this dormant memory. It's as if time stopped and you suddenly understood that when it was more than it seemed. And then comes that feeling that is hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. A chill, a warmth in the chest, an emotion with no logical explanation. And, even without knowing how to explain it, you know it was real. And do you know why this happens? Because your spirit is trying to remind you that you were never alone. that there is indeed an invisible background acting wisely in the details of your life, that the angels or whatever you call these forces are still there, even when everything seems silent. And that what you have experienced so far, however challenging it may have been, has brought you exactly to this moment, a turning point, an invitation to awareness, an opportunity to reconnect with the most subtle truth of existence. Maybe it's time to be thankful for those falls that didn't happen, for those encounters that were avoided, for those words that weren't said, for that road you didn't take, for everything that seemed to go wrong, but that, deep down, was life taking you away from the chaos. Because protecting is also about keeping away, silently, and that's why so many signs don't make noise. They just happen, but they leave marks, and these marks, even if invisible, shape your destiny. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the question that arises here is, can we recognize the spiritual presence only in great miracles, or are we willing to perceive the sacred also in the small things of everyday life? Because sometimes, the true miracle is realizing how much we have already been saved without realizing it. What was the strongest signal you ever received? Comment below, and when we start to look back with this new perspective, everything changes. What once seemed like a simple coincidence, a small setback, a random coincidence, now reveals itself as part of an invisible architecture, precise, delicate, but incredibly powerful. It's as if the universe were talking to us all the time, but in a language that logic doesn't understand, only the heart. And this requires presence. It requires surrender. It requires a more refined listening, not with the ears, but with the spirit. How many times have you felt that something or someone took you away from a place at exactly the right time, or that an intuition made you back off at the last moment, and only later did you realize the deliverance you had received? It is in these moments, often silent, that subtle forces manifest themselves most clearly. They do not come to show off, they come to protect, to guide, to adjust the route, when we ourselves do not realize that we were about to stray from the path. And when a story like this child's happens, it touches a very intimate point in all of us. Because there is no room for theory there. There is impact, revelation, the hidden truth manifesting itself before our eyes, breaking the pattern of routine and showing that the world is much more than our limited senses can capture. And the most curious thing is that, once you wake up to this, it is impossible not to see it. It is as if a veil falls. Suddenly, you begin to remember forgotten details. You begin to notice signs that previously went unnoticed. You begin to feel that there is indeed a loving intelligence acting behind the scenes of your journey, and that you have never been alone. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something very important that we need to understand. Every time you share a true spiritual experience, no matter how simple it may seem, you create a bridge with other people who are also awakening. And this bridge is more powerful than it seems. It strengthens, it heals, it validates the invisible, because when one person speaks with an open heart about something they have experienced, and another listens with an attentive soul, something changes in both of their fields. And this is the true current of faith, not the one that imposes itself, but the one that is recognized, that spreads like light, silently, but deeply alive. So, if you have ever experienced something similar, no matter how small, now is the time to let that story come to light, not out of vanity, but out of mission. Because maybe your story is the sign that someone on the other side has been asking for a long time. Maybe your spiritual memory is the missing key for someone else to understand theirs. And if there is one thing the world needs right now, it is more awareness, more connection, more truth. Because faith, when shared with purity, multiplies. And so do miracles. So if this touched your heart, right? I felt it too. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you recognized the truth behind these words. Maybe you felt a presence. Maybe you remembered a memorable moment. Or maybe you just realized that you're not alone on this journey. And that's exactly why we continue together. Because this is what this space is for those who feel, for those who believe, for those who experience the invisible as something real. So, if this content touched you in any way, if it brought clarity, comfort, or even that silent chill, leave a like. Not just for me, but so that YouTube itself understands that this type of message has value. And if you want to continue receiving content like this, with depth, truth, and soul, subscribe to the channel. Here we don't just speak with words, we speak with the heart. And comment there. I'm with you until the end, just so I know that you have been present, attentive, and open-minded up until now. These words show me who really walks along with me. And if you want to go further, tell me, what was the strongest sign you have ever received? I read everything, and each story, each connection, makes this space vibrate even more. Now, there is a video here that complements exactly what we talked about today. It will deepen your perception even further, and may be that missing link for something to make complete sense. Click and stay with me there. The journey is not over yet.